What is Section 385?
The 1969 tax law allowed Treasury to put in place regulations in order to stop earnings stripping. Now, earnings stripping is a practice of putting in place debt instruments whose only purpose is to create a tax deduction. And there were a number of intercompany loans that would fall into this category. Last year they released proposed regulations, and they were very far-reaching and would have impacted even foreign subsidiaries and normal cash management tools like netting and pooling that are used all the time. As you can imagine, this caused an uproar. There are actually 2,200 comment letters sent in with 26,000 comments, of which 140 of the comments were unique. So that means a lot were duplicative because people were concerned about the same things. And these were taken into account when determining the final regulatory requirements.
I thought that was resolved in the final regulation, and Section 385 is no longer an issue that I have to worry about.
Unfortunately, that's not the case. Intercompany loans are still impacted, but there were a number of changes to the regulations. First, and importantly, the bifurcation rule was eliminated. It gave the IRS the discretion to treat debt instruments between two related parties as part debt, part equity. In the comments, there was a concern that this would be too arbitrary. There was no guidance on how they would create this decision, and this has been eliminated, but they've reserved the right to address this at a later time. So for now, it's good news for companies. They also adopted a $50 million threshold. Previously, the $50 million was excluded, but once you breached the $50 million, all intercompany debt would be included. Kind of like an on-off switch. This has been changed so that the first $50 million of recharacterized debt is excluded. Certain industry-specific groups are excluded, like groups where consolidation is restricted, like an insurance company, and certain regulated industries, banks, and so forth. So loans between two foreign subsidiaries are also now excluded, which makes sense because if it's between two foreign subsidiaries, why should there be the IRS involved in that? Importantly, pooling and other loans that are short-term in both form and substance were excluded from the requirements, except for the documentation rule. In form and substance, in this case, means that they don't pose a significant earnings stripping risk to the IRS. This exclusion was a key win for corporations.
What are the documentation rule requirements?
So the first thing the documentation rule requires is that the agreement must be legally binding and unconditional obligation to pay a sum certain on demand or at fixed dates. This is actually part of common law. So essentially, it must be comparable to what a bank would have as an agreement with a borrower that would outline the terms of payment, covenants, events of default, etc. The creditor must have the right to enforce the terms of the obligations. For instance, there should be an ability to accelerate if there's a default, or an ability to attach to assets. There may be security, or covenants, or terms that can trigger acceleration, or a preferential right to share in assets upon dissolution. So it's important to try to mirror what a standard credit agreement is, because that would be helpful in making sure it is looked at as hands-off. There also must be a reasonable expectation of repayment. This requires that there be a due diligence in demonstrating the ability to pay. So the IRS will be looking at whether these borrowers are making payments as prescribed by the documentation. So it's important to keep proof of the payments. This also means the company must have some proof that they evaluated the creditworthiness of the and repayment ability of the borrower, just like a bank would do. This one will be a little tougher than other parts of the documentation because companies will have to develop a method of performing this analysis. They might do a debt capacity analysis or a shadow credit rating or some other form of credit analysis, but it has to support the validity of the loan. This has to be done at inception and annually thereafter. And a fourth requirement is that the relationship between the debtor and creditor has to be genuine. There must be evidence of principal payments and interest payments being made on time. If they're not, there must be evidence of the creditor exercising their rights as creditor, maybe accelerating the loan or attaching to assets. For pooling, the regulation permits that there be a master agreement reviewed and renewed annually so that each draw doesn't have to be a separate loan.
The Department of Treasury said in the October 2nd, 2017 report that they will review the reporting requirements and perhaps develop new simplified documentation requirements. This is related to Executive Order 13789, which identifies and reduces tax regulatory burdens.
If you'd like to see more from our FAQ series, click the link in the description. And thanks for watching.